I don't think it was deserving own show.
Yeah.
It seemed like a side character, and that got their own show, and it just didn't really.
Yeah,
It's when you do a spin-off of a show, and you're like, hey, it's Joey's show from Friends. You're like, yeah, not as good. He relies on others to.
Echo was the Joey of the MCU.
That's right. It's like, yeah, you kind of need others to. Welcome back to the Cinema Clubhouse podcast, and in today's episode, we are tackling a beast, a time travel, multiverse jumping, quantum physics breaking beast. You guessed it, the MCU post-Endgame. Today we're going to fix the MCU or make it more cohesive, make it better.
Yeah, we're going to kind of break down. Obviously, the MCU's been kind of inconsistent in a lot of people's eyes post-Endgame.
Yeah.
We're going to kind of talk about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and kind of give our thoughts as to what the major problems have been and give our ideas for not necessarily rewriting the whole multiverse saga, but just putting it back on the right track.
Yeah, we want to get it back to feeling like Marvel used to feel, where we were leading towards something exciting.
Right.
And I think now it's kind of seemed like, here's this, here's this, here's this. Oh yeah, we are doing something, but it doesn't feel like that's a plan. So we're not going to rewrite everything, change everything. We're just going to kind of rework it to make it fit a more multiverse saga timeline.
Yeah. And just to be fair, we are not producers.
Yet.
We do not run major studios.
But we do run a major podcast, and we thank you for watching and listening.
So keeping that in mind, obviously it's a tough job.
Yeah.
We're not here to say we would do any better, but we have some ideas. We're not, beholden to investors and trying to get subscriber numbers
That's
up.
right.
And,
we don't have quotas to hit.
Exactly.
But we do have ideas that we think might improve it. So that's what we're going to share with you today.
Exactly.
All right, Will, let's how are we going to get into this?
Yeah. First, let's talk about some highs and lows.
Okay.
I feel like I said, MCU's been inconsistent, at least compared to what they were in the first three phases.
Yeah, definitely feels that
it seems
way.
like once we were getting up to, Infinity War Endgame, it was box office hit after box office hit, critical darling after critical darling.
Yeah.
Like, not that phase 3 didn't have their ups and downs, but the valleys were much less deep.
Well, I think it's because we saw the mountaintop at the end.
Right.
Sometimes now it feels like we're just stuck in the valley and we don't know which way to go to get out because they haven't provided a path that makes sense or is clear, because I don't think they know. I think a lot of things have changed since they started this, next few phases.
And again, to be fair, we haven't seen the culmination of everything yet.
Right.
Maybe, in a few years from now, we're looking back and it's like, okay, phases 4, 5, 6 were a little choppier than the first saga, but they ended up pulling things together in the end, and it was ultimately worth the destination.
Yeah.
Or the journey, rather.
So we're coming in mid-journey.
Yeah.
But hey, with the announcement of the Doomsday cast, what better time than now to see how we could fix what exists now to more lead into this where they're going, to where we're not as like, what's going to happen,
Yeah. So, talking highs and lows, I feel like, opinions may vary, but the inconsistencies may be overstated at this point just because there were so few in the previous phases. But just kind of talking about some highs, we've got WandaVision.
Yeah.
I feel like right out of the gates, kind of not missing a beat.
Well, yeah, and I think it gave us a false sense of like, wow, every show is going to be unbelievable.
Yeah.
WandaVision was incredible. It's a really good post this huge thing we just went through and this completely new thing that we're like, what is this? And, we're kind of grieving with Wanda as fans as a whole. And it kind of was like, we're trying to figure it out as well. Yeah. So it was a nice lead into the next step.
Yeah. And it's to this day, it's still the best TV show, I believe.
Yeah.
It's the best made for TV. Obviously, that was at a point in time where everything had to be on the small screen. Yeah. So, they were kind of backed into a wall and had to probably pivot away from some of the ideas they had in terms of release schedule and what's a show, what's a movie. I'm sure they had other ideas, but yeah, to this day, WandaVision's still great. Another one, Loki.
Yeah.
Kind of, like you said, right out of the gates, we got like a few different shows that have been better than I think others down the line that they've done.
Yeah. When I think those kind of fit into, they were pretty good as TV shows. Some of the other ones feel like we don't have a TV show. We need to get something on Disney Plus immediately. Let's take this movie and turn it into a show.
Right.
And it just doesn't always translate the best, movie to show.
Yeah. I mean, not as much as WandaVision, but I feel like WandaVision and Loki both fit as true TV shows.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what made them work the most.
Yeah.
Then you have something like Shang-Chi, the first basically new character that we get post Endgame.
Yeah.
I think they knocked that one out of the park as well.
That one is incredible. I love that movie. It was a nice introduction to a new character, but presented in a way we hadn't seen in the MCU yet. So it was exciting and oh man, this guy's going to be on their team now. This is exciting. Yeah. And even with some of the post-credit stuff, you're like, okay, we're getting ready to incorporate him into the team and use him. And then it just
nothing,
absolutely nothing.
Yeah. It was a cool introduction to another pocket of the universe we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And, Marvel had done this really great thing the first 3 phases where that first phase we got our core players.
Yeah.
And then they slowly would give us one project where we would get some new blood.
Yeah.
But they didn't oversaturate it.
Right.
I feel like that's been a problem.
Yeah. It kind of feels like here's this character, here's this character, here's this character. Oh yeah, here's the character you already know, but it just all seems disjointed, and especially for this multiverse saga that we're in, they haven't utilized the multiverse to its full potential, or even some of its potential, really. It's like they've tried to avoid it, and you're like, hey, this is what you set up, so why are you avoiding your own rules and your own thing?
Yeah, and so they gave us a new character like Shang-Chi, like I said, knocked out of the park. Haven't seen him since.
Right.
That's one thing that's, I love Shang-Chi. I want to see more Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
To this point, it's been, 4 years?
Yeah. And it's not barely a mention of anything that and again, a lot of the movies and shows and stuff, it's what the beginning phases did well is acknowledge other things that are going on.
Yeah. Sprinkle.
Even if you don't have to talk much about it, but just a line of dialogue or a picture. Right now, it seems like this is its own thing. We don't even know what this is. And it's they're not speaking to each other. And it's so that's why it feels disjointed, because it kind of is.
Yeah. I mean, the first few phases, we got an Iron Man movie, and then he pops up in the next one. We get Captain America. We see him in Avengers.
Right.
Same thing with Thor, Guardians.
Yeah. They had opportunity to show up outside of their own movies for you to get to
Ant-Man and Civil War.
Yeah. And it's just there hasn't been any of that.
I think we've had a lot of highs. Other ones, No Way Home.
Yeah.
Knocked out of Guardians 3.
Yeah.
Great. I put Miss Marvel in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of their better TV shows as well.
Yeah.
Again, introduction to a great new character. Did actually see follow up on her. Unlike Shang-Chi, but again, they have a bunch of highs that I think people dismiss just because they're frustrated with the overall direction.
Right. And again, going back, it's not like these are missing so bad, but in the beginning phases, there was rarely a miss at all. Yeah. So it's even one slight lesser thing is the end of the world. It's oh, they've lost their step.
Yeah.
I don't think they lost their step. I think they've lost their vision. And in goal, and I think that is continually changing, but they still need to get content out. And I think Disney Plus is a problem in we have to get stuff on Disney Plus. We have to have content on Disney Plus. And so it's just at the cost of the content, though, because it's well, how are we going to weave this in? Well, we can't do that now. Change it, just get it out. And for that reason, that some of the shows have like not been as great, because you feel like, man, they took a movie script, rushed it out into a show, and then here it is, and you're just like, okay.
I think that's a good transition to what some of the lows are.
Yeah.
I think by far, and we agree on this one, the biggest misfire of the whole post-Endgame saga, Secret Invasion.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's bad decision after bad decision.
Yeah, it was like a snowball of bad, and it never recovered, and, wasted characters, killed off characters for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And the story they chose should have been really impactful to the rest of the MCU, and it's kind of like in a vacuum. It happened here, and it wasn't that big of a deal.
And honestly, at this point, I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
Nothing about that project worked. It's just the worst combination of bad decisions for the overarching story and missed opportunity for a beloved comic story that could have been used in a greater fashion.
Yeah.
That to me is the biggest true misfire. I think there's others along the line that I consider misfires just because they were misused.
Right.
One, for instance, would be Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest misunderstanding of what the movie was.
Yeah.
Meaning that we haven't been in the multiverse yet. This is the new saga. This is not the Infinity Saga, it's the multiverse. And Multiverse of Madness was the point to showcase the multiverse and connect it to other things. Specifically, I mean, the original direction, having Kang be, the person they have to deal with, he should have been in that for sure. And Doctor Strange should have met him and saw him and been like, that's the first introduction for Doctor Strange and what they potentially might have to deal with. But it's like they didn't connect it to anything.
Yeah.
And it was its own thing. And let's make Wanda the bad guy. I didn't love that. I didn't love it.
I feel like Multiverse of Madness is the perfect like encapsulation of what has been the issue with the MCU, which is like in and of itself as a movie, I enjoyed it. I thought it was effective in what it was going for. It just it lost it didn't have the vision of what they did with previous projects. Like you mentioned, it should have been kind of the catalyst for the rest of the saga.
Yeah, I mean, it should have started sprinkling stuff in and connecting things.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the TVA is mentioned somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I mean, all this stuff that is now like, this is where they're going. It's like, that was your opportunity to do that. And you not doing that shows us you didn't know what you were doing.
Yeah. They gave us a good Sam Raimi movie. They didn't give us a great like MCU contributor.
And I think most people don't like it because it's kind of over the top. It's Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
And it feels that way. But I think what I didn't like the most about it, I enjoyed it, like you said, as a standalone movie. It's, I enjoy it, but it did nothing for the overarching story. And again, that's why all these phases seem so disconnected, is because
there's no through line.
There's no through line. And especially that one. That one should have been like maybe a mini team up movie to where it had more things. And it's just like, they just missed the opportunity completely with that one.
Yeah. Another misfire. Again, I don't think necessarily a terrible movie. Wasn't a great movie either, but Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. This was the kind of quote unquote kickoff of Phase 5.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be our quasi introduction to Kang, at least I think the wider audiences. A version of Kang was in the Loki series before this, but this was our introduction to Kang the Conqueror.
Right.
Again, it was weird because it was not quite a good Ant-Man movie and also not quite a good MCU movie.
Right.
Like it kind of walked the fence and didn't really pick what it wanted to be.
Yeah.
And it kind of suffered for that. Again, the introduction to Kang, him losing to one of the weaker Avengers is not the best introduction to what's supposed to be the main villain.
The introduction to your next Thanos needs to be impactful. And they did it in the wrong movie, I think.
Yeah.
And I did with the wrong character.
Right.
And so they, even before the Jonathan Major issues, they kind of set themselves up for failure with how they introduced him. And like going back, it should have been in Multiverse of Madness is where we saw him for the first time outside of Loki. Like that is what would have made sense.
Yeah.
It would have made way more sense. And you wouldn't have had to, you know, make Wanda this evil thing. And he could have been an issue and been like, what, who is this guy? And it's like, oh my gosh, like this guy could be a real threat. But they didn't do that. And then it just seemed forced in the Ant-Man movie. And again, it suffered because it wasn't able to be an Ant-Man movie.
Yeah.
And it wasn't able to be what it also needed to be. So it just didn't work.
Yeah. So like, again, another example of not necessarily just a complete misfire. There's some good things about it. It just wasn't, in my opinion, and I think yours too, used properly for what it needed to be.
And I think that's the biggest misstep in a lot of the things where they fail is like they're not used how they should be to make the rest of the story fit. And that's it's not so much that these movies just suck. Mm-hmm. It's because our minds are trying to connect into the other things because that's
what we've been trained to do.
Yeah, they made it that way. Like everything's connected. Everything is leading towards something.
Yeah.
So now we're used to that, but it's like it's clear that whatever their original vision has been changing as they're making the movies, and it's like none of this works now. We have to scrap it, and it's like the reason the other phases work so well is they knew how they were ending it.
There was at least a skeleton, and a through line, that was being able to be followed by the independent like filmmakers that worked on various projects. They still let the filmmakers, for the most part, make their own movie they wanted to make. They just had certain things to stick to make things just make coherent sense.
Yeah. Again, it seems like once Kevin Feige got more responsibility and more stuff to oversee, and like he had less focus on, just his movies, adding the shows and all these other IPs and all this other stuff, really took him away from the being there day to day to make sure this is sticking to the vision that we want. And that's what it kind of seems like. It seems like he can't be everywhere. So there are things that are just going to get through the cracks. And
I think that kind of is a good transition into what we think are the main issues that have been. There's too much content that has been in these phases. I mean, the first few phases, over a 10-year span, it was like 20 movies, which is a lot.
Yeah.
But, they kind of ramped things up a little bit. Obviously, it was all movies. It wasn't any shows. Right. They started off kind of a couple movies a year, and then they moved into 3 movies kind of as they were toward the end of the saga.
Yeah, but not mixing in those, we have to get these shows ready and these shows done.
I mean, just in 2021, and I know some of it has to do with the pandemic kind of pushing things back. But there were, I believe, 10 projects in 2021.
Yeah, so that's too many.
It's too many because you don't leave enough space for the audience to get excited for the next project.
Yeah, because it's already out, and you're like, I didn't even know it was out. I'm not even caught up on that.
And then it becomes homework.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's like, now I have 5 shows I missed. It's like, I don't have time to do that. And that's what makes you less excited, and what it seems like, the MCU's lost its appeal. I don't think it's that. I think it's just too much that we're just like, maybe slow down.
So you need to scale back a little bit. And I think they're already doing that. That was a pivot they made fairly recently in the last year or so. Mm-hmm. They started off with so many projects. Now it became quantity over quality.
Yeah.
They've addressed that. We'll see how that pans out.
Yeah.
But I think probably for the better, there's more quality control. Like you said, Kevin Feige is not spread thin.
Right.
He kind of is able to be puppet mastered a little better.
You need to have a goal.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is. Us as fans can disagree with the goal, but as long as you have a vision and you're like, this is where we're going, we will appreciate it more, even if it's not what we would have done, than this mindless, we're going left, we're going right, I don't know where we're going. It's like, we can tell when there's no direction.
They're at that point where there are some things that are going to be retconned. I don't see how they even address the events of Secret Invasion. Maybe they will. I mean, the multiverse that they've set up is very messy.
Yeah.
part of that I think is by design. Part of it I think is by poor execution.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, we don't know how things are going to shape up eventually.
Right.
Eventually we may look back at projects and be like, I didn't like that one, but it was a blip.
It led to something.
It was a blip in the overall like culmination of things. So
because right now we look back and we're picking out like, oh, Spider-Man was good, Guardians was good, this wasn't good. And again, I don't want to just watch these as individual things because we're supposed to watch them as this is all one huge story.
It's a big TV show.
Right. But right now, lately it has seemed individual and like, I don't know how these are going to go, especially now where they're going.
Yeah.
And again, this year could be different.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic Four could fix some things. Thunderbolts could fix some things quickly and then be like, okay, we're back on track.
Yeah.
Who knows? And I think they will do a lot to be like, this is where we're going now. And maybe forget all that. This is where we are.
I mean, that's the positive and negative of having such a large universe of movie and film at this point, being 17 years in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, God, 17 years. Being that far, on the one hand can be an issue because, everything becomes so convoluted and people can't keep up and there's too much homework for people. But on the other hand, it doesn't take a lot of projects to sort of right the ship.
And I think this year will be telling.
Yeah.
To see if they can, or if it's like Doomsday's their last hope,
I mean, ultimately it kind of, they can't get the Avengers movies wrong.
Right.
That's the kind of thing that sinks the whole ship.
Yeah.
You can have projects misfire along the way, your Quantumanias or your, in the first few phases, like
as long
Thor
as you
2.
make it up with Avengers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Avengers can fix a lot of things.
Right.
So I think that's one of the issues, just too much content.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, we want to address is scaling back by killing some projects that were combining some storylines.
Yeah.
Making some shows, movies, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the other main issue we kind of already touched on, just kind of an aimless lack of overall vision.
Yeah.
Again, we may be proven wrong in the coming years.
Yeah.
But at this point, there just hasn't been enough to sprinkle in what needs to be.
Yeah. And again, that has drawn the lack of excitement, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of why the movies are struggling,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Captain America still, did pretty decent, but to their standards, they're like, it's not successful unless it does, X amount. But it's like,
yeah, Marvel's not held to the standard of barely, making a profit.
Right.
They're like billion and
and I think the biggest problem is they usually relied on the Avengers movies to make the money back on the ones that were subpar.
Yeah.
And it's been so long since we've had a team up movie that they haven't been able to recoup that. So it's like they're stuck in this like, oh man, we're going downhill because it's like, well, yeah, you haven't had that, the checkpoint movie to kind of reset everything.
That was the thing, the first few phases you had that, distinguishing point between the phases was the Avengers films.
Yeah.
Those were the culmination of that phase, and we moved on to the next kind of phase of the story. Like you said, we haven't had an Avengers film. It's been the same amount of time that we used to kind of go between Avengers movies. The problem is there haven't been one, and there's been like twice as many projects, three times as many projects.
Yeah, so triple the content without that
team up.
So it feels forever.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of the main overarching issues of what's happened. We've kind of put together some ideas for not how we would just rewrite everything, but how we would use what has actually come.
Yeah.
Not knowing how the future projects are going to pan out, but sort of teeing those up, if you will, for more success just from a story standpoint, but also probably a monetary standpoint too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because it builds the excitement. So
yeah.
First off, gotta eliminate some excess fat.
Yeah.
I was probably more of a fan of Black Widow than a lot of others. Ultimately, the main piece from it was introducing, her sister Yelena, Red Guardian,
right,
for Thunderbolts.
I mean, my only problem with Black Widow is the time it came out. Like that was after Civil War.
3 years too late.
Like you needed to release it where it came out, where it was in the timeline, because when you have Black Widow already dead and gone, and then you're like, and here's her movie.
Spoilers,
like,
Travis.
Hey, come on. This is the MCU we're talking about here. This isn't Sixth Sense. Okay?
Yeah.
It's just there's nothing to invest in. You're just like, yeah, well, she dies in a few years, so it's like whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'd say delete it or somehow get it back and release it when it was supposed to come out.
Yeah, find a time machine.
Yeah. Hey, they have that.
That's true.
They can do it.
Yeah.
Like you did see this did come out after Civil War. Like,
yeah. So there are elements I'd like to keep in other projects, but also with the movie serve no greater purpose to the MCU. So eliminate that. Eternals, again, another one that I was kind of a fan of. Might have worked better as a TV show. We kind of talked about.
Yeah, I think it would have worked way better as a TV show, and really, I also think it would have done way, way better if it was in a different time period than they set it in.
Yeah.
Like the modern day didn't really work. It was so interesting, like when they're jumping through time and different history. It's like pick one of those times and let them play in there, and then kind of save them, and then maybe like at the end of the movie they come to the modern time and they are kind of aware of the Avengers and other things. And I think that would have worked way better as a show, and then doing that way would have just been like, a lot better.
Yeah.
It was just too much to cover in a movie.
It was a lot, and ultimately like pretty isolated story. I would like to see those characters come back into the fold.
Yeah.
Not sure how they do that. That's not for me to decide really, but
Secret War.
Yeah, Secret War.
When they're going to have to get everybody who's ever donned an MCU role.
We'll see somebody from that movie again. I don't know who that'll be, but ultimately got to sacrifice that one just to keep things a little bit tighter. One we kind of split hairs on, Moon Knight.
Yeah.
Again, I felt was a little bit of a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Don't think it connects to the greater MCU all that well.
It doesn't. It is definitely a standalone, but
interesting.
Yeah, I loved it. I think post Endgame, I was kind of checked out because it's like I just invested 10 years of my life. I finished the journey I went on. I'm kind of done. Yeah. Like I'm not interested in Thor. I'm not interested in the characters without Iron Man, without Captain. So that was a refresh. Like this feels different. It didn't feel like it had the MCU color grade on it, where it's like you follow these steps because it's an MCU movie.
Right.
It felt way different, and I loved it for that. But again, it doesn't. If we're planning on using Moon Knight somewhere along the lines, it would have made sense. But it doesn't seem like they are. So it kind of is just like here's the thing.
Yeah. If there wasn't so much going on that needed to be factored into the story, like I'm okay with having your sort of isolated stories, but it needs to at least tie in a little bit. Like, Iron Man 3 was kind of its isolated story, but it tied in just enough that it was important to the saga. So, for that reason, kind of want to get rid of Moon Knight.
Yeah.
Maybe he comes back into the fold too. We'll
sad
see.
Travis.
Makes Travis sad. Echo, again, inconsequential. Was an interesting character they introduced in Hawkeye.
I don't think it was deserving own show. It seemed like a side character, and that got their own show, and it just didn't really.
Yeah,
when you do a spin-off of a show, and you're like, hey, it's Joey's show from Friends. You're like, not as good. He relies on others to.
Echo was the Joey of the MCU.
That's right. It's like, you kind of need others to thrive, but that's how it felt.
Yeah, just kind of honestly a blank character. It could have been an interesting swing like they did with Moon Knight at least, but it wasn't even really that. So for that reason, got to cut ties. And then Secret Invasion, the one we both agreed on that we think is the worst thing Marvel's ever done.
Yeah.
Want to eliminate the show.
Yeah.
But want to keep the elements for other projects. So
yeah,
that's kind of where we start. We shaved off a little fat for phase 4. So how we would kick it off is with Loki.
yeah,
For the most part, I think you keep the show the same.
yeah,
You know, popular character, seemed to go over well with audiences. Was a good setup for other things down the line.
mm-hmm.
We got our introduction to Kang of sorts.
Yep.
I forget what they called him.
The one he who remains.
He who remains. Yeah. So gave us that initial tease of who should have been at least the main villain of the first part of the saga.
Yeah.
We'll get into whether that holds true later, but
yeah.
You know, a good teaser. I think the show, one alteration might be just setting up Loki to be part of Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
We both kind of talked about that earlier, or maybe you just talked about that, and I imagined myself talking about it.
Yeah, it was like, yes, I agree. But, no, yeah, I mean, I think that would have made sense to then have Loki help Doctor Strange with the things he's dealing with, because now would have been an interesting team up that, you know, wouldn't
two Time Lords. If
yeah. I think it would have been it would have done a lot better for the direction. I mean, the multiverse saga, right? Like, this is the introduction. It was a sprinkle with Loki, and then now we're like, here it is. Here's the multiverse.
Yeah. So I should have mentioned up front, kind of our main thoughts of what the objectives for phase 4 should be.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, set the stage for multiverse saga.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily want to go all in yet, but sprinkle it in.
Mm-hmm.
Loki would be doing that.
Yeah.
Another thing we want to do is few of the original Avengers kind of have open-ended stories after Endgame.
Yeah.
Obviously, Iron Man's is wrapped up in a bow.
Yep.
Same with Captain America, Steve Rogers.
Yep.
Obviously, Black Widow, R.I.P.
Yeah.
But, you know, Avengers like Hawkeye, like Thor, like Banner.
Yeah.
Kind of wrap up their stories. And then one of the other things would be to do what this next project, I think, starts to set up, WandaVision.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, let off the new phase of the MCU in a very strong way. Set up a number of things in and of itself that ultimately we didn't like the direction it set up. One thing it did set up, however, was Wanda and Vision's 2 children, Billy and Tommy.
Yeah.
Or as they're better known in the comics, Wiccan and Speed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the next main objective of the phase 4 should be to set up the Young Avengers.
Yeah.
So I kind of see it as, you know, the movies are tying up loose ends with the old Avengers while setting up the multiverse saga.
Yep.
The shows doing similar things, but ultimately leading to a Young Avengers.
Well, yeah, and then they can parallel each other where they meet in a movie.
Exactly.
That's kind of seems like maybe they had a kind of an idea, like, we're going to do the Young Avengers through the TV series, but that would have made way more sense for the decisions they're making in the shows to then lead into the movies in the future. But you don't have to pay that off right this second.
Right.
You let each one get to the next step until they, line up.
The idea is to utilize the two different mediums and make it so the audience can recognize these are the building blocks.
Yeah. I think it sets it up beautifully.
So I think WandaVision does that. One thing you kind of touched on earlier was, you know, with her becoming the main villain of Multiverse of Madness. Ultimately, we both kind of didn't like that decision. You know, I kind of think it was just one step too fast. Obviously, we're left with a gap of time after WandaVision, but you know, her ultimate resolution in WandaVision was she kind of acknowledged her wrongs and was sort of on the path to redemption from that and kind of becoming whole as the Scarlet Witch.
Yeah.
So because we didn't really like that direction, she went in Multiverse of Madness, becoming the villain, and because we think King should ultimately assume that role in the movie, whatever the plot ends up being. An idea I had for the WandaVision show was that in order to make her two children real, she has to make a sacrifice. And that's where she makes her sacrifice as kind of the misunderstood hero, as opposed to the villain pulling a Darth Vader, essentially.
Right. Yeah. And I think that was not a good ending for her. If it is the end of her, I don't know, but like it's the end for now. And again, if you wanted Wanda to be turn into the villain, then they should have saved it, for later.
Yeah.
Not done it that early. Like maybe make it to where people that know her well, not just Doctor Strange, other Avengers have to help defeat her.
Yeah.
I think they rushed, like it could have been a cool arc for her to become like the king over, like this is where we're leading. Like she is the main villain that the Avengers now have to fight.
Yeah.
But it seems like they skipped all the steps to get there and she's just there.
Yeah. The development, or, whatever the opposite of development is, took place off screen.
Yeah.
To where she was seemingly on the path to redemption, and then nope, she's straight up the villain.
Well, and we needed to see that can be an off-screen thing.
Yeah.
For one of the Avengers that we've grown to, care about, like that, just it's lazy. We can't do that. And
so that's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah.
And then leading into a project that I really liked a lot. I know it's kind of uneven in parts, but that was Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm.
This one should be a movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
It
should have been his first Captain America movie.
Yeah, it should have been. Yeah, it should have been his first Avenger. Him wrestling with the struggles of becoming the new Captain America, and ultimately becoming Captain America.
I think it would have been an awesome movie, like really good movie.
Yeah, and it was one where I think, for right or for wrong, Marvel Studios has pushed a lot of shows to us for characters that at least they deem are not like big box office worthy.
Yeah.
And so they're like, we'll put them on Disney Plus, give them the small screen treatment. But I mean, I think at least at this point in time, and a little bit before, Anthony Mackie, I think, is a leading star that people will go see.
Well, yeah. And I think anyone they present in the MCU as one can be, because of the characters they're playing.
Yeah. At the point in time that it was released, it was still, I think movies had come back.
Yeah. I think they started to come back, but again, they weren't full swing.
They weren't full swing yet. So it probably was a project that should have been delayed.
Delayed. Yeah. It was a movie, and it seems like a movie that they turned into a show.
Yeah.
It seems like, we'll add all this other stuff that doesn't need to be in there.
But I mean, similar to the way the Avengers movies are checkpoints.
Yeah.
I feel like the Captain America movies have been a pillar of every stage.
Yeah.
Or every phase, rather.
Yeah.
We got one in the first phase, we got one in the second.
Well, and they give us a new Cap, and then they deprive us of our Cap movie. And it's like,
right.
Are you scared of the decision you made? Like, this is what you set up.
Yeah.
So we're going to buy it. And it's like they pulled back, and it's like,
yeah.
Well, and again, that's the lack of vision. Like, well, you need to, I don't care what direction you go, just pick one. And
lack of vision and lack of conviction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's just like, whether you agree or not, I appreciate that this is what we're doing.
You're going for it. Yeah.
And that's where it started. And again, I think COVID affected this way more than they'll ever like say or admit,
sure.
But it's obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at that first, year on Disney Plus, all that stuff that you're like, this was probably another project, or there was never a plan to actually develop this as this.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, make that a movie, delay it if you have to, but then that kind of gives us that mini checkpoint of here's a Cap movie. Now we can move on.
Yeah, the Captain Americas, like the Avengers movies, always were turning points for what was happening. The first one introducing, with the time jump and starting the Avengers.
Yeah.
The second one with, the downfall of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
And then Civil War, like all of them were major turning points in the whole series. And so, like you said, it's a bummer we were deprived of that story on the big screen.
Yeah, it really is.
It would have been an awkward marketing moment with their change of title.
Yeah.
But also kind of a cool thing. And I feel like people would have understood it was a Captain America film.
Yeah. Is it just me, or did they both Captain America and Falcon storylines, they had to switch because of some kind of events that have happened? Or it's like, did the Captain America movies predict where the world's going, but the world gets there before they release it, so they have to change stuff?
Maybe. Then we got films like Shang-Chi. Keep it the same.
Keep it the same.
Nothing really change about that. Easily a highlight. Yep. Talked about Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yep.
Again, nothing needs to really change about that one. The conclusion of the origin trilogy.
Yep. And it leads into sprinkled in more of that multiverse where we're just like, okay, this is good. Now it's a little more than we got last time.
Yeah, at this point we have a little bit of multiverse sprinkled into Loki, Wanda, Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Even maybe Shang-Chi a little bit.
Yeah.
You kind of have maybe not a different universe, but a different world kind of introduced.
Field. So yeah, everything is different.
Then you have movies like Thor: Love and Thunder. Not a popular one with most people. I like it more than some other people, but I acknowledge its flaws.
Yeah.
Ultimately, this is a chance to not necessarily retire Thor, but I feel like he leaves in a place, even with the movie that already is, where I know he's going to come back, but it could very easily have been a Thor rides off into the sunset.
Well, it could have been Thor dies.
Yeah.
Because we've already closed the chapter on 2 of the other original Avengers. I feel like leading into, before we even get to the next huge Avenger thing, I feel like the door needs to close on the main 4 at least. And the new ones take their place. Yeah. And they didn't do they're too scared to commit to that. And it's like, Thor should have died in his movie. You should have not given him the Jack Sparrow treatment where he just gets stupid and he's really smart and kind of witty in the first one, and then you're like, oh, this is good, let's turn him into a complete idiot.
Yeah,
he became a complete idiot, and you're like, that's too far. We just went too far.
Yeah, Thor Ragnarok was the perfect Taika but reined in.
Yeah, well, they let him free on this one,
unleashed.
And it didn't work. It didn't work for this. But I would have had him maybe die, and now it shakes what they're leading up to even worse.
Maybe sacrifice his life for Jane.
Yeah, because now we're down 3 key Avengers, and Kang is still coming, and this huge thing. And what are we going to do? And it's like, if they would have done that to this point, I mean, way more bought in on this. Like, oh yeah.
Oh, I mean, killing off Thor at this point, and
I think the time was right. Like, it felt right. Like, he just went through his whole grief and everything with Endgame, and he did redeem himself. He did get back, but I don't think we can still have some of the main Avengers and not all of them. Like, if we're going to replace the team, let's start replacing the team, which it seems like that's what they're going to do. But then now they're like, oh,
the stage is set for that.
It is.
And
so that's where I would have done it. I don't know if you agree, but that's his end.
Yeah.
There.
I don't.
Obviously, it's a different movie, but
sure.
Still, his third movie should have been his sacrifice to save somebody else.
Either sacrifice himself, and that's the end of his story, or, like I said, kind of right off into the sunset. He's set up kind of with a new daughter.
Yeah.
Being a father figure now. That was always kind of his journey, becoming Odin.
Yeah.
in his own way.
Right.
But
yeah,
he's at a point where he's not going to be king of Asgard. That role is already taken, but it's not what he wanted.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I would have done there. But yeah, retire Thor. Then you got Hawkeye. Another one where I kind of wavered between show and movie. Ultimately, I think leaving it a show is fine. It was fun just to kind of have the Christmas element. The show tried to introduce too many elements, whether that be with Kingpin and, in turn Echo and
I would have left those elements out.
Yeah.
And just kind of introduced
Kate Bishop.
And again, another young Avenger that is introduced in a show and kind of turn the focus more to her.
And again, Black Widow's sister Yelena is in this show too.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it is a powerful moment when you realize, she services because we've seen her before at this point. But I also think this would have been a great show because one of the main facets of the show is him dealing with the grief and kind of the guilt of Natasha being the one to sacrifice herself in his place. When he kind of thought it should have been him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought the show should have leaned a lot more into that. It did a decent job of it.
Yeah.
But that should have been the crux of the show. Just him dealing with that, uses as an entry point for Natasha's family, aka give us some Thunderbolt members.
Yep.
Introduce Kate Bishop, continues our Young Avengers building blocks.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. It's a good place to bring Hawkeye's story to an end.
Yeah. And again, they've set it up. They have all the pieces in place for all this. I feel like they just put them in the wrong spot or used them the wrong way to where it could have had a through line and could have had all this direction. It's just, they either didn't think of it or it was just too rushed to, we see it from the bird's eye view way out here.
The pieces are there.
Yeah.
So ultimately that's what we do with the Hawkeye project. Then we got Black Panther, Wakanda Forever.
Yeah.
I enjoyed this movie for what it was. I thought it was pretty impactful.
Yeah.
Really cool introduction to Namor. I thought all that was really cool, really menacing world.
Yeah.
I loved the conflict created between the two countries.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there's not a whole lot I would change with this movie, except for the decision with Black Panther.
Yeah.
If you're going to go the route of not recasting T'Challa, you're going to have him die off screen. I understand the impact of having Shuri take the mantle with it being his sister and everything.
Yeah.
But just logistically, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
She's the Q in this world. She's not James Bond.
Yeah. You can't have Q be James Bond. That does not work.
That's called Naked Gun.
Yeah. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah. And so while I ultimately bought what the movie set up and I'll see what they do with Shuri Black Panther moving forward.
Yeah.
Maybe my mind will be changed. I've changed my mind about characters in the past.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I would have gone a different route. Probably Nakia.
Yeah.
She's got the warrior experience.
Yeah.
She's got kind of...
It made more sense.
Yeah.
It seemed more... I know the family element, but that seems more logical.
Plus, you have the cool thing with the end tag where, they had a son. That's why she disappeared.
Yeah.
But, being brought back into the fold and sort of reluctantly taking on that mantle would have also been powerful. And from a box office standpoint, I think it makes more sense too, because I think Lupita Nyong'o is she's not necessarily a huge draw.
A bigger household name.
But more so than Letitia Wright.
Yeah.
I think she's more capable of leading a franchise.
I do too. And it just seems like I understand why they did it, but it doesn't fit where they're going.
Yeah.
And so again, we could be wrong, or they could be like, just kidding. And so, be like, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, at this point in time, I've heard rumblings of them now deciding to recast T'Challa. I don't know if any of that is true.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what I would have done in the situation. It's not like one that was easy to make from an executive standpoint.
Right.
You know, obviously would have loved to see. I think they had big plans for Chadwick Boseman and as T'Challa. I think they were setting him up to be one of the pillars moving forward. I do too. So really unfortunate.
Yeah.
But you know, I thought they did a great job with the situation they were dealt.
Yeah.
And ultimately made a pretty good movie. Just made a decision that wouldn't have made with the Black Panther.
Right.
So
just tweak that a little bit.
Just tweak that. Obviously, there's some elements you can throw in there that connect a little bit more to the saga, but that almost needed to be kind of an isolated story. For what it was.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's the same. Just Naki as our Black Panther moving forward. Then you got She-Hulk. One of those not the most well received. Kind of an understatement, you know. It's one I think I would ultimately leave in just as service to retiring Banner.
Yeah.
In the same way we're kind of retiring our Avengers like Hawkeye and Thor.
Yeah.
I feel like Banner could have been more utilized in the show as a mentor and ultimately passing the torch like some of these other characters are.
Yeah.
They really kind of half-assed it with the procedural, like the courtroom procedural element, which could have been really great if they just...
I think they should have leaned into that more, and it should have been more like a courtroom drama series that really, really dove into more logistics of, you know, of their world and how that plays out. I think they just like kind of, it was in there, but not, it could have been the focal point more.
Yeah. And again, there's some things that did right. You know, I thought what they did with Daredevil was really funny. And, you know, that was a great backdoor into introducing Daredevil back into the MCU too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, not everyone's favorite. It definitely wasn't mine. There were a lot of things I liked about it. Ultimately, I think it mostly should serve as Banner's send off.
Yeah.
Or at least just so he has less of a role moving forward.
Yeah.
Not necessarily with She-Hulk replacing him. That could be the route too. But, you know, sending him off, introducing Daredevil, kind of being an isolated pocket where we get to have a little fun with genres.
Right. Yeah.
So we keep that. Then we've got Miss Marvel. Ultimately, like I said, one of my favorites. Kamala Khan, I thought it was a really great character introduction. Right up there with Shang-Chi for me in terms of new character introductions.
And leads right into the Young Avengers storyline that we're setting up.
Yeah, exactly. I think, you know, this is the Captain America First Avenger leading into the First Avengers for the Young Avengers series.
Yeah.
So I would leave most of what the show's story is in place. It ultimately ends with a tease for the Marvels.
Yeah.
Because she's so obsessed with Captain Marvel, I would save that that meetup for later on. Pay it off. It would have a little bit more impact instead of waiting a year or so or however long it was till the Marvels and a lot of people not even knowing who she was because they didn't watch the series.
Right.
And I would, again, was a really great series. We'll leave most of it the same. I think it ultimately, instead of teasing the Marvels, it's a setup kind of like they did at the end of the Marvels with her and Kate Bishop meeting up.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's recruiting Kate Bishop for a mission.
Well, yeah, it should have been like when Iron Man's or Nick Fury's recruiting Iron Man. Like that's what it should have been for the Young Avengers.
Exactly.
And then we could have a really, you know, first step into this next like big thing that they're gonna face.
Yeah.
And it's kind of separate for now from the others.
Yeah.
But eventually it'll tie into the multiverse with the main cast.
Yeah. So I think first that, like I said, that leads into our first sort of new project, which is the Young Avengers. That's how everything on Disney Plus kind of culminates.
Yeah.
You know, you've got Kamala Khan's Miss Marvel. You've got Kate Bishop.
Yep.
You've got the Maximoff kids,
Yeah.
Wiccan and Speed. And then, you know, similar to the other Avengers, you kind of reintroduce or introduce a couple of other ones.
Yeah.
Like you bring in, was it Ironheart, who was introduced in Black Panther, into the fold. You could bring in a couple other ones. I'm not as familiar with the Young Avengers.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I think we have all the pieces there to set up, you know, whatever we would need to for their team up to, you know. And again, if you follow the Disney Plus shows, this is where they're leading.
Mm-hmm.
And the movies are leading here, and eventually they're going to cross over.
Yeah, eventually.
Yeah.
And you can pick and choose what you want to bring up to the big leagues, if you will.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, that's ultimately, I think, where we leave there. Really,
good.
Really fun culmination for the Disney Plus if you're following all that.
Yeah.
If you're not, then you've got the big screen storyline, which ultimately where I think we decided on this one. Actually, we talked earlier. I think there's one project we might slide back into phase 4.
Yeah.
Which is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Yeah.
Some decisions were made in that kind of hedged their bets and ultimately led to a unsatisfactory introduction for Kang.
Mm-hmm.
So because both of us think that Kang should replace Wanda as the main villain rather in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, I think Quantumania should lead into that movie.
Yeah.
Too many things to kind of talk about in terms of adjustments for the story of Quantumania, but
make it more of an Ant-Man movie. Pick a villain that, you know.
Well, ultimately, I think you can include Kang in this one, because I think it's an interesting decision to have, like, who's supposed to sort of be set up as your ultimate villain be introduced in an Ant-Man movie.
Yeah.
Where it's like big mismatch. It's not like he's coming across Thor or Doctor Strange. Like, and just seeing how Ant-Man navigates that. Ultimately, the decision they decided to make was, you know, Ant-Man and crew sort of defeat him and escape the quantum realm.
Yeah.
You know, you find out that Kang was trapped there. You know, mostly because of his equipment. But, you know, I think this would be a good way to really set the stakes for Doctor Strange by making it seem like they've defeated Kang in a way, making it more of a struggle than they ultimately did in the Quantumania we got.
Mm-hmm.
But trapping Scott and Hope in the quantum realm and seemingly vanishing Kang the Conqueror. Yeah. But then we see that's not really what happened, and that leads into
Multiverse of
Madness, which we talked about earlier. It doesn't necessarily need to be a titled like Avengers Multiverse of Madness, but
kind of like a Civil War to an extent, like where it's like a team up, but on an unofficial.
It's an unofficial Avengers.
Yeah, like it just happened. Like, we need your help, but it's not an Avengers movie. It's just like a few of you.
Yeah, so
come help.
Phase 4 culminates with Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which is a pseudo Avengers team up movie.
Yep.
You bring in Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
You bring in Loki.
Yep.
Whoever else makes sense of the story. Again, we're not going to create a script from scratch here.
Right.
But, you know, ultimately it's Kang instead of Wanda as the villain.
Yep.
You're having all this multiversal stuff happen, you know, chasing Kang through universes.
Well, and then having Loki kind of explain what's really going on.
Yeah.
And like with what could happen with all this stuff you're messing with.
Yeah.
I think it would just help guide, you know, the overall experience and like where this could lead and what it is going to lead, which is Secret Wars, because
and it makes sense for what's come before,
right?
We've set up, we've trimmed the fat a little bit,
yeah,
and all these projects. We still got a lot of projects up to this point,
yeah,
but we got our first big kind of 2 checkpoints: the small screen and the big screen.
Yeah,
so
it's good. It's real good.
All right, so that's phase 4.
Yep.
Phase 5 is still incomplete. Again, we're not going to try and write the entire future of the saga. We're just kind of working with what we've got. So, again, shifted back, Quantumania. We already cut the fat of the saga a little bit, eliminate some movies.
Yep.
So, I think initial kickoff, the main objectives for this phase would be setting up the multiversal kind of conflict to come.
Mm-hmm.
In that, we get our. I think the best play would have been to get our first tease of Doctor Doom in Multiverse of Madness, similar to like we got Thanos in the first Avengers.
Yep.
So kind of set up that multiversal conflict that's to come.
Yep.
Into phase 5, phase 6, and then we need to know who our Avengers are, our big screen Avengers.
Yeah.
So I think those are the 2 main objectives that I would have focused on in phase 5.
Yeah.
Just makes the most sense.
Yeah. Nailed down. Now that we've retired Thor, we've kind of retired Hulk, Cap and Iron Man are gone.
Yeah.
Who's taking the mantle? So we got new Cap.
Yeah.
And then
we know one.
And so how do we piece it together to where, it makes sense? And
exactly. So, I mean, you have some projects that'll remain the same. I think Guardians Volume 3 was pretty universally loved.
Their movies were good at being standalone, but also if they needed to sprinkle something in, it was in there.
They were important to the Thanos story earlier. Now I think we can use them for a standalone adventure somewhere down the line if we wanted to, but Guardians 3 was a good send off for a lot of characters, and we got the tease of Star-Lord will return,
right?
So I think that's teeing him up to potentially be more prominent as an Avenger potentially.
Yeah.
So would leave Guardians Volume 3 the same.
Okay.
Next project, another kind of major shift. The Marvels. So was a fun movie in and of itself. I thought it was more good than bad, but ultimately a lot of missed opportunity. Yeah. We talked earlier about Secret Invasion being the biggest miss.
Yep.
So it makes the most sense to have a Skrull story in a Captain Marvel movie.
Yeah, where they were introduced.
Introduced. So
and someone who's dealt with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of a big, Marvels team up like we got, which was fun, but again, we're talking about saving Kamala Khan's introduction to Carol Danvers for somewhere down the line.
Right.
Not as soon. We're going to make the Marvels Captain Marvel Secret Invasion.
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think it kind of seems like that's what the original plan was. It kind of seemed like that. And then they just, swish it last second. Because again, it was already set up for that to be a story that she dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense that she deals with it more so than Nick Fury alone, basically.
Yeah.
Like it just makes sense. And, there's more potential you can introduce in that movie that makes other people in the MCU aware of this more so than just, the limited people that knew about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a globe spanning thing. You know, I think ultimately we do bring her back to Earth.
Yeah.
But I think you still keep Monica Rambeau in there. I think that storyline is important just for them to kind of reconciliate.
Yep.
Obviously you have Sam Jackson's Nick Fury returning. Yep. Keep him part of the storyline because he wasn't the first, but he didn't need to be leading his own series and making this separate from Captain Marvel. So I think ultimately you got to you got to change up the story a lot from what it was.
Oh yeah.
What they had just didn't work.
Yeah.
You know, they subverted the whole scroll thing in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, with any groups, there's going to be sub factions that there's probably going to be unrest.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you pull the story from. So,
yeah.
You know, it's a faction of scrolls that there's unrest. Danvers and crew need to deal with that.
Yep.
There's some kind of government plot, government takeover that they need to prevent. You know, Sam Jackson and Nick Fury and Sword are involved.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, I think the events of this ripple into the next Captain America movie.
Yeah.
Kind of envision Secret Invasion as like a multiple movie arc.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think there's some resolution sort of in the Captain Marvel movie where, you know, ultimately the threat is neutralized to an extent but not extinguished.
Yeah. And then
now we get into Captain America Brave New World, which you know, this is a recent one that just came out as we're making this.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know the ripple effects that movie has on future projects, but you know, one of my biggest issues with it was it kind of looked backwards instead of forward most of the time.
Yeah.
So again, I think Captain America Brave New World may need to be retitled, you know, maybe not. But you ditch the Red Hulk stuff. You know, you don't need to recast General Ross with Harrison Ford, even though I thought he was great.
Yeah.
You know, you don't try to validate the Incredible Hulk's existence in the MCU
right.
with the Captain America movie. Like,
yeah.
That doesn't need to be a part of a Captain America movie. Instead, actually utilize Giancarlo Esposito's character. Maybe he's a Skrull.
Yeah.
But, you know, ultimately his group, the Serpent Society, maybe they are either made up of that faction of Skrull or are affiliated with.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what you lean into. They were trying to lean into that government conspiracy spice thriller tone anyway that they had in Winter Soldier and Civil War.
Yeah.
So into that.
Lean into it and utilize it to wrap up the Secret Invasion kind of story arc.
Yeah.
To or at least make it more impactful to the rest of the MCU.
Exactly. And so, you know, you may have cameos from the Captain Marvel crew in this movie as its carryover.
Yeah.
They know about the Skrull, but I think one of the main changes I would make, and I know there's not precedent necessarily in the comics that I know of, but instead of General Ross being president-elect in this, maybe you have Rhodey be president-elect. He's the one that ultimately brings in Sam as someone he can trust to, you know, help him with, you know, whatever government conspiracies happening within his administration that has global repercussions.
Right.
And that's kind of what you focus on for that.
Yeah.
And then, like we said, one of the objectives was of this phase, reassemble the Avengers.
Yeah.
So Rhodey is the one that's like, we need to get the crew back together. Like something's happening here.
Yeah.
Like things are kind of in disarray. We need some kind of order again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think that's great. I think that's a great way to lead into the next Avengers team up and still tackle some of the storylines we have out there, but also addressing the multiverse that is the big thing that is coming. And I think having them see this through the Captain America movie opens their eyes to like there's something bigger coming. Yeah. We can feel it. We can see it. We need the team. And that would be, I mean, all of those changes I think would really bring in the interest back to like where these phases are headed.
Yeah, you have your intersection of stories going on. You have your team ups kind of forming organically. You know, we need the Avengers back. You know, tease the multiverse along the way as the ultimate thing. Again, that kind of puts us to the point where we already are right now.
Right.
again, there are projects yet to come.
Right.
As we sit here, Daredevil's going on. Not really sure where that ends up or what ripple effects that has on the universe.
Right.
Movie wise, we got Thunderbolts coming.
Yep.
Obviously, they're being teed up to be important. How they are, who knows?
Right.
Fantastic Fours, with Doctor Doom looming, we know they're going to be a major.
They're going to be pretty important. Yeah. So again, a lot of these things could be the ship could be, the direction could be fixed in these next 2 movies, and then kind of leading into their, Doomsday and all the other stuff. So, but again, if you make these tweaks to what exists, I think it.
There's Kevin Feige.
Yeah, Kevin Feige, please go back and change what you already did. No, but I think it would take the ease off of our, how is this going to fit in? Like, it's already fit in enough to where we're not even questioning it. And I think everything's more successful. There's more interest because the TV shows have a different storyline to follow. And you don't know which one's going to carry over. Like, because right now it seems like this one might carry over. This one doesn't. Yeah. It's just like, these are theirs. These are theirs until we need everybody at the end. And I think, having the Young Avengers show leading into like the Secret Wars, and they get some multiverse stuff going on. Like, we need help. Yeah. Like, we can't handle this. And then, they get to the big league with all the other Avengers, and who knows what happens.
And that presents from some fun storytelling too, like how they kind of are folded in. But again, we're not producers. Neither of us have really deep seated knowledge of the comics. So this is all just based off of
what we've seen,
what we think would make sense for what the seeds they have planted. But that's kind of how we think the MCU could be fixed at this point. Again, maybe in a couple of years' time, we're looking back like, hey, there were some ups and downs, but ultimately they stuck the landing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's still time to stick the landing.
Yeah.
But we're running out of time.
Yeah. We're getting close to having to abandon ship. But again, those are our thoughts. Did we fix the MCU in your opinion? What changes would you make? Maybe there's some comic storylines that we're not taking into account that they've already set up. Maybe there's some other logistical factors that we're not taking into account either. But leave a comment how you might make a fix, what you would change, what's been thus far, anything you might introduce that could kind of shape things into something more coherent. While you're down there, leave us a like, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, join us for another Cinema Clubhouse podcast.